Welcome back to Understanding VC. I'm your host Rahul. Today, my guest is Brian Frank. Brian is a founder and general partner at FTW Ventures, an early stage venture fund investing in food and agriculture tech startups. He's experienced in both technology and food and understands the complexities of running startups at the intersection of these two challenging spaces. Prior to founding FTW, Brian led three venture backed businesses to successful exits and directed innovative products in communication, mobile, social, and AI ML for both startups and Fortune 500 companies over his 20-year career. Now let's talk to him. Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Rahul, for having me.
So, I've heard you mention that you grew up in a household where eating was a joy and appreciating that food is good for our health. It brought us together. I'd love to know more about your family background and also, where you grew up.
Yeah, happy to. Like I said, we live to eat, not eat to live at our household. So my mother was the consummate home cook. She cooked everything, all types of international cuisine. My dad had actually studied a little bit about cooking in France when he was traveling through France during college. So he made the exotic things and the fancy things like crepes and soufflés. And so we had a really kind of tight household that would tend to eat together when we could. My dad was a traveling salesman, so we didn't eat together as much as we would have liked. Yeah. But my mom was always finding a way to put food on the table. I lived in suburban Philadelphia, so just outside of the city there. So we had access to, decent produce, but nothing like I do now here on the West Coast, because everything comes from the salad bowl of California. So we had good food on the table, fresh food all the time. And then I ended up going to Cornell University, which if you know anything about Cornell University, it's both a great technical school and a great food and ag school. And so I kind of continued my trend of learning more about the food system and eating well as I went to college. And then I went off to careers in technology that took me all over the country. But it always kept bringing me back to those family meals, sitting with my family on an evening, eating good food together that my mom had prepared, spending time with my brother and my dad. My brother was much older than me. So, whenever we were all home, it was a joy to kind of all eat together and share a meal.
Yeah. Yeah. Having a meal together, that's something that even I should start doing.
Yeah.
It's a good practice for family bonding.
We just started a family ourselves. So we had a newborn. And so that's one of the things we try and do every night is we have a meal together. And I'm the cook of the house. So I'm always getting behind the stove. And we even got a little stool for our little one to stand up on and watch me cook. I hope to impart, kind of that home cooking ethos to him, that you can make great food for yourself using fresh ingredients very simply. And, you can feed your family, which is just one of the biggest joys, in life.
So you've been a product manager for a lot of technology companies, built companies, and now you're a VC. But if you were to look back, what would you say is your favorite 12-month period of your career?
That's a hard question because I've done some pretty cool stuff in my career. I started a company in college with some friends that ended up getting sold to Microsoft. I traveled across the country working for a number of different startups. But some of the formative things in my life was, I would say, kind of my first internship in my junior year in college. Or my sophomore year in college, I was starting to think about my future career. And at the same time at college, I was also putting on musical concert events in school for traveling bands. And I thought I was going to get into the music industry. I even got an offer from a touring sound company to help put up sound systems for big international tours. And I remember I was also interviewing at Intel the same year for an internship in Oregon. And the funny story about the internship was a gentleman calls me and he goes, "Hey, we've got this job, writing database software." We had all these registration cards. Back in the day, people used to have to fill out registration cards by hand and send them in. He's like, "We want to digitize all that and we want you to come in and write a database." And I'm like, "That sounds really boring. I don't want to do that." And he's like, "Okay, I might have another job. My husband's in another department. He has a job in the internet and communications group. Would you like to go work for him?" And I go, "Well, that sounds interesting." The internet, and this was back in 1996, the internet was just becoming a thing on college campuses. And I said, "Well, that sounds very interesting. Can you tell me what he's doing?" And she's like, "No, I can't. They haven't released their product yet." So on one side, I'm looking at going at Intel for an internship. On the other side, I'm going into the music industry and starting as a roadie for bands. And on the same side, the woman who was booking the bands couldn't tell me what band she was going to book. And she was like, "Well, I don't want that to be the deciding factor." And so there's this really pivotal point in my career where I was like, am I going to go start doing my tech career and start learning about technology from inside? Or am I going to take this job touring with bands? Well, long story short, I ended up going to Intel and I ended up working on one of the first standard protocol based internet phones. So what we're doing today was based on technology that my team was developing at Intel. These two-way communications with voice, not with
Nice.
video yet. This was still too early for video, but I was one of the first people to make a fully duplexed or fully kind of synchronous call over the internet at Intel. And I got written up in the New York Times for it. And so much so that I was going around Oregon to all the different Intel offices and they were recognizing me like, you're the guy that did the first internet phone call. And I'm like, yeah, it was just part of my job. Turns out on the other side of the coin, the sound company had just signed the Sex Pistols to tour Europe. And I passed up on touring Europe with the Sex Pistols, one of my favorite bands. And my dad would never let me forget it. He's like, my idiot son turned down the biggest opportunity of his life to tour the world with the Sex Pistols, to go to Intel and work in technology. And so it was a pretty formative part of my career. It kind of taught me a lot about, launching technology products from the early stages. I wouldn't change a thing, but, you kind of look and go back with the what if, like if I would have gone the other route.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of things. The most common thing that most of my guests have done, like the guests who have been on the podcast have done in college, is like running events. I think that's a very common thing for a lot of people to make money.
I did it because it was fun. I think I probably lost money on it, but it was just fun and bringing people together, right? Like that's what we want to do. And, we can talk about how food brings people together, but like my whole goal was to see joy and experience, pleasure with other people so that we could create a community. And I think technology is a lot like that. We're trying to give experiences to people that will uplift their life, whether it's work, play, or learn. And that's kind of what has chartered my career, is how do we create all those opportunities for people to live better, right? And, kind of fast forward to where we are now is taking that from just pure technology. How do we work, play, and learn? How do we eat and live healthy lives, right? Became more of my passion over the last several years. And it kind of just follows that same thread. And like events and community organization kind of is the start, like you say, for a lot of entrepreneurs of figuring that out. Like they want to bring people together around a common goal or common prospect.
Yeah. And your time at Intel as an intern, what is the one thing that you've learned from that experience which has helped you as an entrepreneur?
Oh, it's a great question. I think persistence, one of the things that I learned is, no one's just going to hand you the rights to do whatever you want to do, right? You have to go out and seize it and take it. And I remember when they were kind of describing the job to me, there was a lot of open-ended questions of like, well, how do I do this? Like, where do I go to get the resources? How do I do this next stage 2, 3, and 4? And they're like, you know what? We hired you because we don't need to lead you, right? Like you're going to have to figure it out. And so that self-starter nature and then the persistence to follow through. And so one of my tasks was to figure out what we could use this internet phone alongside, because it's great to have a phone call or conversation, right? If you're calling your mom and saying hi and she lives, halfway across the world, that's an amazing thing. But what if you could do more? What if you can learn using, a phone call with, expert long distance, or you can play a game with someone and you can chirp or chat at them, right? And they and have it more interactive. And so I settled on gaming as the area that I wanted to focus on, and I had to go figure out what games we were going to use, get in contact with these games companies. I'll relay one story to you. I had found a company that was very popular in the early gaming world called Sierra Online. Sierra Online was one of the first kind of online gaming companies, very early days. And they were coming out with a brand new game that was going to be all online, massively multiplayer. And I called up the company. I said, hey, I'd really like to feature this game, in some of our marketing and promotions. And I ended up getting on the phone with the CEO of the company and having him come demo the game at one of our conferences. And as an intern, that is like unheard of, that you're able to get this level of access. But as persistence is just, finding the right routes, contacting people, giving them the details of why this is valuable, selling to them. So I think there's a lot of things that, I took away, not just persistence, but self-starting, and also like being a salesman, right? Your job as an entrepreneur every single day is to sell yourself, your company, sell to your team, sell to customers, right? Figure out what they need and give it to them in the most convenient package. And so it taught me a lot of being at that type of focal point of a big company trying to do something innovative and using all these tools that I now was developing myself, that none of those, would have been developed otherwise. And it helped me in my journey through 7 startups. I mean, I've been through the ringer 7 times, raising capital, deploying technology, and then ultimately selling a number of those companies. But it all goes back to that formative days at Intel where, you teach this basic skills of self-reliance, self-starting, persistence, and salesmanship.
Yeah. So I mean, I saw your tweet where you mentioned that Intel had these posters where they list the job number one is to sell more processors, and job number two is just follow job number one. So I thought that was a great thing because that's the best thing that you can learn.
Exactly, and it's funny because it's also recursion, right? In computer programming, right? You say line one, do this, line two, go back to line one, right? And you just constantly reinforce that. And that's one of the things I try and teach my startups when I work with them as a venture capitalist is you need to have a North Star for your business, right? What is it that you want to accomplish or achieve that brings you more money, brings you more consumer love? Some of them are really, really simple, like Intel's, sell more processors, right? That was our job at the time. Others are, a little bit more squishy, which is like, if you look at something like Airbnb, it's their tagline was belong anywhere, right? And so you have to create those kind of mantras or missions that everybody can follow, and they lead to ultimate success by following those very, very simple, kind of keywords and metrics that will drive your business. And so again, another learning from Intel that I just keep using. And Andy Grove, who I got to meet when I was there, was an absolute genius at motivating teams. I mean, quintessentially one of the best leaders in technology. Tons of books and stuff has been written about him. But when I got to meet him, the guy was just affable. Like, you wanted to like this guy because he was such a nice guy. And he led from a position of just loving what he's doing and loving how he's going to change people's lives. And so I remember showing him, our first demo of this internet phone playing a video game online. And he goes, "This is amazing." He's like, "You take me back 40 years when we were starting, everything around Intel." He's like, "I never would have imagined we would get here." And, that love and passion for just seeing innovation kind of change people's lives, like, goes a long way, and then inspiring other people to kind of have that same kind of emotional response, not just the tactical response, but an emotional response to what you're doing, and that helps build really big businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, his book, High Output Management, is something that I consider as like a Bible of management. A wonderful book. Yeah. Now, tell me more about FTW Ventures and your fund strategy.
Yeah. So at FTW Ventures, we say we are trying to build a more sustainable food system. And that's using all of the most advanced science and technology that we can bring to bear to this system. And I think the reason that we've kind of locked on in science technology can up-level our food system is it's one of the few industries that has not integrated science and technology at its deepest levels to create productivity, safety, quality, and sustainability, now becoming more and more into the picture for our food system. And how I came to this revelation was in 2015, I was selling a company to Google. I was lucky enough to exit that company and leave without having to spend time investing at Google. And I said, I really want to do something that not only can make money, because I'd made money in my career building technology businesses and selling them, but I wanted to do something that was going to leave a legacy for a future generation. And I felt like now was the time that we can blend both profit and purpose into our businesses. And if you know what was happening in 2015, right, everybody was starting to say, we really need to kick this climate change, remediation and fixes into high gear. And so a lot of attention was being paid to our food system because our food system contributes anywhere from 1/3 to 1/4 of all greenhouse gases, come out of the food system in some way. And so one of our biggest potential solutions to climate change was to fix our food system. That brought me to the realization that, we can't keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results, right? Our current food system basically uses more resources than it contributes back. It is creating a spate of health-related issues in developing countries, as well as now developed countries, as well as developing countries, like ischemic heart disease, diabetes, hypertension. And so we're taking more out of our land than we're putting back in. We're killing our customers. And all the while, we're creating a supply chain that is consolidated in only 10 or 15 or 20 major companies in the world that control all of our food resources and make them insanely cheap based on, commodity products. We needed to diversify. We need to create more opportunity, not just for the, wealthy US citizens, but for the people of the world. And so this created a mission for me and for FTW, which was, how do we fix the food system, make money doing it, but also solve a lot of problems that exist in the world? So we consider ourselves a problem-focused venture fund rather than a tech-focused venture fund. I mean, you'll hear all these venture funds say, oh, we're a SaaS, business SaaS fund, or we're an AI fund, or we're an automation fund. I don't believe technology is there to solve a problem. I believe technology is the tool to solve a problem. I don't believe it's the solution, right? And we can use multiple different technologies to solve any one problem. And so that's what the underpinning of FTW is. We are technology agnostic, biotechnology, automation, robotics, IoT, AI, ML, SaaS. I mean, all your kind of 3 or 4 letter acronyms, right? We invest in, but it's all to serve solving very big problems in the food and agricultural system long term. Which, if you know anything about the food and agricultural system, is a $10 to $12 trillion industry worldwide. It's roughly, a very large portion of our GDP, and everybody in the world eats. So everybody in the world is a customer. And so I couldn't think of a better place to apply both capital and my time to solve big problems in the world than the food system, and bringing my technology know-how and how to go from 0 to 1. So that was the origination of FTW Ventures. That was back in 2015, when it was really just me investing my own money. Fast forward to 2019, I brought on about 20 or so LPs, the majority of whom come from the food industry and the technology industry, but have a passion for food. And so I brought in some much smarter people than me, with capital and advice to kind of help run the ship from behind the scenes. And that's now led to a fully deployed fund of Fund 1. We recently just raised our Fund 2 at the end of last year, and we've brought in some more amazing partners. We have corporate strategic partners such as Louis Dreyfus Company, one of the largest commodity traders in the world. We have a large agri-food concern out of Southeast Asia called Taiwan, which is one of the largest tapioca producers in Southeast Asia. And we have one unnamed top 20 food manufacturer in the world that creates products that everybody knows and loves. And so we've really brought in the best of the best to kind of apply capital and apply expertise. And, I'm the shepherd of that capital alongside of 2 very, very smart women. One who's a PhD in life sciences, who leads our biotech and life sciences investing. And then one who we recently hired last year, who came from the Kraft Heinz Venture Fund, who leads our supply chain, personalized nutrition, climate tech, and sustainable materials efforts. And so I feel very lucky both to have the money and support of some very wonderful people, investors that really care about the food system.
Yeah. So in your communication, I've came across the use of platform. So you call yourself as a platform. Why is that?
Yeah, we think it's not just about applying. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what I meant was a platform for the smartest money plus expertise for the food and agriculture sector. I think that was the way you communicated it by.
Yeah, the way we say it internally is we're time plus money plus network. And so we like to think of ourselves not just as money. The funny way I say it to our founders is I'm a big film nut. So there's a movie called Gross Point Blank with John Cusack. And he goes, if I've come to your door, and he's playing an assassin, if I come to your door, it means you've done something, to warrant me coming to your door. We say the same thing. We're like, look, you come to us not because it's our money that you value, it's our time, energy, and the network of experts that we can bring to bear. And so when we say platform, we say, you're not just getting the money, you're getting so much more working with us. I also like to say to our founders, the money's the least interesting thing about us. If you want money, there's plenty of other people to go get money from. What you can't come to us for is you need accelerant. You need support in a number of different areas, whether it's you need the strategy to go from 0 to 1 to launch that first product. You need experts that have put product in market to help you with distribution, sales, and business development. You need advice on obviously fundraising for future rounds, but not just fundraising from traditional VC, but finding capital from grants and other areas where most founders don't realize there's a bunch of other resources out there to get money from, not just people like me. We are experts on sciences, and so we bring some of the top scientists to bear on companies that are kind of hitting roadblocks with their technology or with their science, and we help people scale up. And I think that's the biggest thing, which is you may be a really good founder, CEO that knows how to build an initial prototype, but do you know how to build 1,000 of them, 1,000,000 of them, right? Whatever it is. Do you know how to acquire customers effectively? Some of these startup founders, they're new to the game and they love the help. Some of the founders are 2 or 3 times, but they're moving into a new segment where they don't have the experience. And some founders have done it, but they want to do it better. And they need, experts that come from top corporations and top research institutes and universities to kind of be their advisors or mentors. And so we give them the capital. Obviously, we're a VC fund. And then we give them our time. So we meet with every one of our startups every single month to go over strategy and fundraising and other kind of aspects that will help move their business. And then we bring this expert network. And you can see just a smattering of our experts at ftw.vc/expert. There's a list of a number of different experts. That's like a fraction of the people that we have working behind the scenes to help us on our startups. So that's what I mean by platform. Brings all of those things to bear.
This also would mean that you would only invest in a concentrated number of companies, right? And work with them.
That's correct. Yeah,
It's not like an index approach.
No, we're a highly focused and highly concentrated fund, mainly because we bring the expertise. I would say if you look at most of the generalist VCs, they're really good at creating a portfolio, a wide range of companies where if any one pops, it makes their whole platform or portfolio, right? We don't think that way. We think that having a little bit more expertise allows you to pick better winners and have a higher hit rate. The analogy I like to give is if you have a Ferrari, are you going to take it to your Ford mechanic or generalized mechanic to fix it? No, you're going to take it to a Ferrari guy, right? And so we consider ourselves the Ferrari mechanics, helping develop and fix, and grow businesses that are very specialized in this category. There's very few funds that can say that. And while I believe my general investing friends have a great strategy, I believe there's an alternative strategy that works too. The other reason we pick this strategy, highly concentrated and focused, is we can work with those generalist guys that want expertise on their cap table, right? And so when a large, tier one fund goes, I need someone that knows food and agricultural technology because I don't have the operating partners or people in my network that know that space, they want to bring us in. And we de-risk their investments, right, by having that expertise alongside them. So we can work great with the generalist investors. The food and ag tech community is very much a syndicate-driven community right now. We're not in a position to kind of go and aggressively take and hoard deals. And so we get in by those relationships and the expertise that we bring because we have these capabilities that most food tech investors or food investors don't have. And then the final third category of investors that we work with are impact investors. And again, these are the Bill Gateses, the Richard Bransons of the world that want to do good with their money. There's a huge growing, emphasis on that these days. Again, we bring in something more different than they do. And so it creates this nice ecosystem where we can be an early stage financier to work alongside generalist VCs that have wide portfolios and de-risk some of the deals that we do. We're concentrated so we can apply our effort to far fewer companies than the generalist VCs or what we call the spray and pray people, right? The people that, get $50,000 and hundreds of companies do. They can't apply their support across their whole portfolio nearly as easily as we can because we're so focused. And then we're all about creating value for the founders. And so we benchmark ourselves not just on our return on investment, but how our founders see us and will they keep coming back to us for money? Because as you probably know, the VC game is I get a first check in, but I need to keep fighting for each successive check I get into a company. And so by bringing those services and being highly concentrated, our founders know we always got their back, right? At that day. We're not just going to walk away because it doesn't make sense for our portfolio, right? Because we have a lot of other bets. So I think it's really good for the founders. I think it's really good for our returns. And I think it's really good for the ecosystem to have someone like us playing a highly concentrated and highly focused role.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the guys who invest in food and agriculture are not in a position to do a lot of these large deals. So why is that? This is a $10, $12 trillion market, but there are not many VCs in this space. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an unsexy industry, right? I think if you ask most traditional VCs, they go, are you really going to make VC-like returns in the food world? It's slow moving, right? Technology doesn't get adopted as fast as it does elsewhere. It is more tradition-based, right? If you're talking about things like farmers, most farmers are loath to do anything new until it's been proven for 10 or 20 or 30 years, right? Because they don't want to risk their family business, right? And many of these businesses are teetering on the brink of bankruptcy or not making their next paychecks because they are so risk adverse. They have no capital and time to kind of take these risks. On top of that, I think there's been this oversell of food tech, of CPGs that are food tech. And when you look at traditional CPGs, they don't return nearly as well as traditional venture. Traditional CPG returns anywhere at max 2 to 3x multiples on revenue. And if you look at the return profile for most technology companies, right, they're 20, 30x, right, revenue, but because they're based on promises and really reinventing something. So I think most VCs in the traditional camps have stayed away because it's hard to make money. Now, I disagree with that on a fundamental level because I think, like you say, it's a very big industry. And if technology can break through, it will have the same effect as technology's had on every single other industry. I mean, look at the self-driving car industry, right? Like, and electric vehicles. Technology broke through on a very traditional industry and it created billions, if not trillions of dollars of opportunity. We're just on the cusp of that on food tech. And that's the other thing about VCs is some like to take risks and bet ahead of the market. Some prefer to bet into the market. And right now, the market hasn't yet developed. And so if you look at the amount of financing and the returns in food tech, it's still not at the level that traditional VCs would consider it to be kind of a consistent moneymaker. And I'll underpin that with something that a very, very smart GP at another fund said to me. Satya Patel at Homebrew, who is one of my informal mentors, and I used to work for him at Twitter. He said to me, you don't take a market seriously until there's $1 billion company being built every single month, right? And that's true of most of the industries. If you look at AI right now, right, every single month we're seeing, another company valued at $1 billion plus. Over the last couple of years, only over the last couple of years has food tech gotten there. Now, I think with this market downturn, we'll see a lot of receding of capital, but it was just becoming a legitimate VC-friendly environment over the last couple of years. And then the economic downturn hit us. So I think we were on the cusp, and a lot of other VCs didn't want to take the jump because they had so much money elsewhere in so many other categories that are already, kind of broken through. But that creates a great opportunity for investors like me, right? That see the future and go, oh, we want to play to the future. And the future is technology will play a massive role. And we'll talk, I know you have a bunch of questions coming up about those sectors where we see technology playing a massive role. But I mean, I'll preempt one of them, which is like the ways we get protein right now, they can't scale, right, to meet the needs of 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. And so that's absolutely where a lot of focus has been going these days, is to figure out how we scale the protein production industry. And so we're starting to see those markets develop. And I fully expect the big traditional VCs to rush in as these markets start to develop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned about $1 billion businesses being built every month or so. So at that point, the boat is already sailed, right? As far as a fund manager is concerned, you should always be investing early, right?
Exactly. And that's why you get into a market before it's kind of popped. But a lot of VCs are a little, they don't know enough to get into some of these markets. So they're hesitant. So they're worried that they'll make bad bets. But also, I think that they would rather someone else prove it, right? And both lose and make a lot of money, so that they can ensure that they're going to get their returns. That said, I think once $1 billion business is being built, there's a lot of opportunity still in those markets, because you're exposing opportunity by showing that a business can reach $1 billion. And if you study kind of, VC philosophy and laws, there's a law called the power law, right? Which says that the businesses, that generate the biggest returns are generally consolidating a large percentage of market opportunity. And as a VC, you need to be in those businesses. And there's generally two that take up 65% of the market opportunity, right? Then everything else is niche. So if you see one business that's reached $1 billion, where's the second, right? Who is that second? And so if you only see one, there's an opportunity. And so I'll give you a good example. We all saw in synthetic biology, Ginkgo Bioworks reach a multi-billion-dollar valuation. Where's the next Ginkgo Bioworks, right? At the end of the day. And so all of us are asking ourselves, like, okay, so the market's starting to pop. Where can we get into the next, unicorn? And I hesitate to use the term unicorn. I'll name check another old school VC. Stuart Alsop said, you shouldn't be chasing unicorns. You should be chasing dragons. And he goes, the difference is a unicorn is something that's valued at $1 billion on paper based on their last valuation. Dragons are the ones that actually return for $1 billion plus. And he's like, you need to start talking about dragons. And so I talk a lot internally about chasing dragons, not chasing unicorns, right? We want to create billions of dollars of value. We don't want to create billions of dollars of paper worth, right? At the end of the day. And as you see from the market downturn, a lot of these unicorns are going to lose their unicorn status, right? Because they were just highly overvalued in the current market conditions. And so we think we're trying to create value. And so it doesn't really matter what it gets valued on interim on paper. We just got to keep focusing on how do we create billions of dollars of value, through our startups. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity once you start to see those companies come. And then the question is just always staying ahead of the curve. And so like I talked about protein production, while a lot of people have been focused on protein production over the last, several years, 5-10 years, we've been focused on sugar reduction and salt reduction, because we think that comes next. If you look at I'm just going to do something simple. If you look at the stack of ingredients on the back of a label, right? Protein is up there near the top. Fats and oils are right there. sugar is right there and salt is right there. And all of those things have
Yeah.
problems, right? So if we stop thinking just because the next billion-dollar protein company has been created, right? Possible Foods or whomever, there's going to be new opportunities that come because we're now exposing that there's the ability to create billion-dollar markets. And so the next set of companies, like the fats and oils companies, will be the next billion-dollar companies. After that, sugar replacement, right, will be the next billion-dollar opportunity. So we keep seeing it as going, okay, you just need to stay one step ahead of the curve, once you see those billion-dollar companies pop.
Yeah. So let's take a imaginary synthetic sugar company. When there is such an opportunity, you see this is a very unique opportunity from a particular team. What do you think will be the signs of a team that has the ability to sell this to the consumers?
Yeah,
What would be
that's a
some
great
of the
question.
signs?
Well, I mean, first off, is the team capable of doing what they say they want to do, right? Is there some signpost from their previous experience or from the current work, how ingenious they have been with developing the business that show me they can get kind of to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 of this? Also, do they understand the risks and hurdles that they're going to face? So let's take this synthetic sugar company, right? Does somebody recognize that they're going to have to do rat studies and human studies, right, before they can actually launch this in the market? Or are they cavalier? Oh, we'll just go sell this to a major food company and, be in market, right? And so we look for the indicators or the signposts that they, A, can do what they say they can do, and B, understand the risks and complications with doing what they're doing, either from an expertise perspective, they've done it before, or they have people advising them, or they have support that helps them chart the quickest path to market through the industry that they're going for. So a lot of it is on team. Are they the best high performing team that we can invest in? The second thing is, are they accelerating into a big market, right? Or is this market going to become big by the time that they're able to launch their products or services? Sugar substitutes, right? Like, it's a top 1, 2, or 3 problem in American foods right now, right? The government just changed the labeling law, so you have to put added sugar on your label, and now people are looking at that. And so all of the major food manufacturers are going like, I got to reduce the amount of, additive sugar from traditional means, both for health reasons, but also for marketing reasons, right? To my consumers. So they don't think I'm a sugary candy or, a sweet treat, so that I actually consider me to be something that they want to have stock consistently in their pantry. So you look for those market opportunities where it's a number 1, 2, or 3 problem on the customers that you've identified are going to need this. In the case of alternative sugars, right, that's very, very clear, right? Every single major CPG in the world will need something to replace sugar on the back of their label. And then the third thing we look for is what we call unfair advantage, or you can say disruptable advantage. But it's something that this team has, or the technology that they have, that is so unique that's going to be very, very hard for someone to copy or chase them. And in the case of sugar substitutes, there's a number of different avenues for going about this. One is about the technical sophistication, the IP that you have, right? You've developed something at a university lab or in a research institute, and it's going to be very, very hard for someone else to marshal the resources and the talent to do what you've done, right, in a reasonable amount of time. The other way, though, is you have such experience with the market segment that and you can bring the product to market faster and easier than anybody else. I mean, your Rolodex is a defendable unfair advantage, right? If you've already worked in most major CPGs in a related field of kind of reducing caloric intake or health of the food, and you're trying to do a sugar substitute, you may have all the people you need to call on to integrate this product. You may have done, health studies already to prove, efficacy of a new ingredient. And so that's your unfair advantage, is just you have the ability to open doors that no one else can. And so if the team and the opportunity check off those 3 things, it's not the only things, but those are overweighted in our ranking of startups, what will ultimately lead to their success from that starting point of basically being a seed or pre-seed level company. Now, if we are investing in a different stage, we'd probably have different metrics, right? Traction and revenue and, operating efficiency. But because we're investing so early, the signposts have to be a little bit more squishy and soft, right? More on the team and more on the market and more on the, unfair advantages. And so we make good judgments based on our knowledge of the industry, based on utilizing experts. So I'll give you a good example. If one of these scientists comes to me and says, I have this amazing sugar substitute, I can put them in front of a top 20 food manufacturer and ask their formulation team, will this solve problems for you? And if the food manufacturer goes, oh my gosh, yes, like this, we've been waiting for something like this to show up. Even if they're not going to integrate it day one, it's a signpost, right? It says that they're going to get the attention of the customers that they need to pay attention, and they'll get the help and support that they need. We have this going on right now with one of our portfolio companies. We have a company in the sustainable material space called Infinite Nanotechnologies. They're providing a moisture and vapor barrier that protects compostable and biodegradable materials better than any other material on the planet right now. And they are fully compostable and biodegradable, which is something that all the CPGs need. And when we took this to some of the leading packaging experts in the CPG world, they go, if they can do what they say they can do, this is transformative, right? Will change our business radically. And so we're looking for those signposts very early on that show us we have a business that's going to really capture attention, and we have the team that can execute, to do the business as well.
Yeah. Yeah. When you bring something very transformational, it can easily sell, right?
It doesn't need much push, right? When you're solving, like I said, one of those top 3 problems, and you can show it, like visually show it, right? And that's the great thing about some of these food techs is like, it's a lot of visual, it's a lot of taste, it's a lot of touch, right? Like there is real world kind of applications for these things. It's going to have an ability. Now, the challenge always is if there's a big enough market, 3, 4, 10, 100 players will all rush in, right? You don't get the ability to hide a market for too long. And so, like I said, you need something to fall back on, which is about execution. There's a lot of people in the VC world that say like, an idea's, it's worth $1, right? A executional idea is worth $1 million, right? Like there's a big difference between having the idea and being able to execute on it.
So when it comes to the current food system, right, what are some of the problems? Like we can talk about specifically regarding the effects of climate change and factoring in sustainability and also the quality of food produced. So especially in the developing world, quality of food produced is pretty bad.
Yeah, your word's not mine. I will take your word on that one. But yeah, you're right. I mean, food had been bred for transport, not for nutrition and health anymore. And so in the US, I like to talk a lot about tomatoes. They're bred with thicker skins and higher water content, right? And that means that they're not as flavorful, they're not as nutritious. I'm sure in some of the crops in the developing countries, same way, right? Or they're sprayed with pesticides or coatings or other things, right, that allow them to be transported, but aren't good for humans, right, at the end of the day, and possibly toxic for the environment, right, to be brutally honest with you. And so we see a lot of different ways that food technology is going to alleviate some of these major concerns. Let's take this logically. Let's start at the farm and let's work all the way to the consumer, kind of highlight some of the major problems. So in agriculture right now, right, we're taking out more resources than we're putting back into the land. And so in developing world, where, it's 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people work in the farming or agricultural sector in some way because it's so prevalent in terms of the work environment and where you would, make your living, or you're a subsistence farmer, right? Farming for your family and farming for your community. The more land you use up and not put resources back into, the less you have the ability to do your job, right? And so we have to find ways for people to be doing regenerative agriculture that puts more back in the land. We have to find ways of making fertilizer cost less. In the last year alone, fertilizer prices have doubled because it's based on traditional energy consumption and fossil fuels. We generate fertilizer using the Haber-Bosch process, which is based on fossil fuels. We have to break that. We have to get off the Haber-Bosch process because it's contributing a lot to greenhouse gas emissions. It's requiring a lot of energy and fossil fuels, which we want to get off of. And it's a tax now to the farmers because you're not going to pay more in the developing world for your, staples because you just don't have it. Or in America, we have romaine lettuces and other things, right, at a commodity price point. Like if that goes up $1, people are going to stop buying it, right? So we have this restriction on what people are willing to pay that goes back to the farmer and doing the right things. And so there's doing more with less is one of our big theses about farmers, and is putting nutrition back into the soil so it ultimately makes it back into our crops. And so we have the soil to keep using year after year. Those are just some big problems in agricultural technology. Then you move to the supply chain and you're like, yeah, we got to maintain quality. So if we put all that nutrition back in the product, in the agriculture thing, how do we maintain quality and not lose product through the supply chain, right? And it doesn't degrade. It doesn't lose its quality or efficacy. Right now, we have a massive problem with food waste. 1/3 of all the product that we make doesn't end up on our tables. It'll end up in animal feed or it'll go wasted. And so you're like, that's just a lot of money sitting there that's wasted, and the product's not even being used for its intended purpose. That's just unconscionable, let alone not good business, right? And if we can give people back the money and the value that they created without wasting that food, that'd be great. Or find uses for that waste stream that are higher value than going to animal feed or going to, the landfill, wherever it might end up. And so we're looking at a lot of waste, what's called waste valorization, turning waste into high value products. So our term is waste less, make more, right? Like you will make more if you waste less product or turn that waste into something of higher value. That's fixing the supply chain. And then we get to consumers. And again, these are just a smattering of the problems. Then we get to consumers, and it's all about feeding them what they need for their station in life, for their health condition, for what they need to live a healthy and happy life. And that all revolves around fixing a lot of these health crises that we've created around food. We've taken a lot more calories than we need. We've taken a lot less nutrition than we need in a lot of cases. In certain cases where we're infirm, younger, older, we're recovering from surgery, we're going to need certain things, right, for our body to heal itself. And food is medicine. So we should be using food as a tool, not just, as something to give us energy. And in the past, we've thought about fuel as food is just energy. But we need to think it more about it's part of our health regimen, and our nutritional supplements is eating the right foods, for each of those things. Now, those are just some of the high level problems. Then you have this huge undercurrent, like you're talking about, of climate change, right? And climate change is going to have a disastrous effect, not just on human living conditions, right? Places will get hotter or colder, but it'll start to make it harder for us to grow some of our commodity crops that we've come to rely on. Yeah. And so like crops that are growing in certain areas, it's getting hotter and drier, and those crops can't be grown there anymore. So we have to make more drought tolerant or more heat resistant crops. We have to figure out ways to create tools to allow us to build better ecosystems for growing things, right? Indoor farms, greenhouses have been used for a long time. Growing more of our stuff indoors where they're not subject to a lot of this kind of massive weather swings is going to help, I would say, ensure that our food system doesn't go down, but it's not the only solution. And so we got to look at a lot of different solutions. And then, like I said, the food industry alone produces 30 to 40% of all greenhouse gases. So we got to look at reducing the methane and CO2 that's coming out of our food system. So how do we reduce, or at least measure and predict and plan against things like cow emissions, right? Are one of the biggest methane emitters out there. How do we protect against all of the transport that's required for food and move it to electric? How do we even just get an electric tractor out there, right, in the field? Tesla and all these other people have electrified, consumer and commercial transport. We've yet to really electrify industrial, right? And when you talk about developing worlds, right, how many developing countries have, diesel equipment that run their factories and run their farms? And so we're going to need to make that really, really cheap, and we're going to need to get it everywhere to really solve this climate issue that we're facing. And when I look at the climate issue, I rank it not only on the ESG metrics, right? The it's good for our future generations to fix these things. I go, if it gets hotter, things will be growing less, means our productivity will dip, means we won't be able to put things in the supply chain, so things will get more expensive. And so you have all this ripple effect of climate change into the entire system. Yeah. If you don't start solving some of these fundamental things, coffee, chocolate, bananas, other things get harder to grow, possibly impossible to grow, and we're going to lose some of these core commodities that we've come to rely on. And so I think both from a purpose perspective, it's good to fix these things, but there's massive profit if we can do it to at least keep, if not increase, kind of our productivity, our quality, and to solve for the fact that we're not going to have all the resources that we need to grow food, in the future, the same way that we do right now.
Yeah. And it's a problem from both sides, right? So like we've been able to increase the agriculture productivity thanks to a lot of fossil fuels, and so now we need to cut back on that. On top of that, the temperature and other things are increasing. We are running out of resources, whereby you have to make that sustainable as well. So
fossil fuels and chemicals, right? So we went through the green revolution, right? We built up all this infrastructure, right, to make more food, higher caloric intake. And now we need to rethink a lot of those things. So we're going through that next kind of food revolution right now, which you're seeing take place. And there's going to be a lot of failed experiments. Let me be very, very clear. As most entrepreneurs know, there's no straight line to success, right? There's going to be a lot of bumpiness kind of as we get there, but we really do need to get off of fossil fuels, get off of chemicals as the primary for a lot of these. I would say more specialty crops. Commodity crops are still going to use a ton of chemicals, unfortunately, because it's just so cheap. And until we get to commodity price points, I would say if you're an entrepreneur coming into the food and ag tech space, the thing I tell people to always worry about is unit economics, right? At the end of the day, are you trying to replace a commodity product, which is really, really hard because it's been hundreds of years that we've created, these ecosystems that can sustain commodity prices, or you're trying to replace, at least for now, specialty and more higher end products with a goal of scaling into commodity. And it's really, really hard to scale into commodity. And so I want to find businesses that have that natural kind of stopping points. The way we talk about it internally is high cost, low inclusion, or low utilization is where you need to start. So if you're starting in, let's say, agriculture, maybe you're starting in a specialty crop that's very, very high priced. There was a point in time where I think I was interviewing like 7 or 10 strawberry picking robot companies. Strawberries are very high priced. When you go into the market, like a little pint of them can cost you $4.99, $5.99, for a small little basket. So there's a high price point for that product. Whatever you're doing, make sure it's small enough that you can produce that quantity, right? If you're talking about producing fertilizer or producing, something that's in every bed, you need to make a lot of it, right? So start small, find a niche product and a niche opportunity, and then scale into each of those successive steps. That's how I think we see a lot of potential in the food industry, and we'll see a lot of traction. Certain other areas are high cost or low cost products that require volume to even be competitive. And, I get into the meat industry, right? Like if you want to produce meat right now, whether it be plant-based or cell cultured or whatever, the price points are unnaturally low for what you have to hit to even get consumer adoption, right? You may stay up at that high-end filet mignon for a long time before you get down to the average ground beef, right? Because of where the price points are pegged. And so I think a lot of founders make the mistake that they're like, well, we're just going to rush to commodity. And you're going to spend a ton of money, a ton of time, ton of energy without any really proof points along the way, whether you can do it or not, to do that. And there's a lot of other investors that will take that bet because they think it needs to happen, right? We need to replace the ground beef industry. We're not that kind of investor. We look at proof points along the way and go, okay, you have a stopping point. You have something that we can hold our hat on and say we've accomplished something that has a market opportunity that gives you the ability to do the next step, right? Versus racing, to those commodity companies. So I think what you'll see is there's going to be a lot of innovation over the next several years that will hit those different kind of milestones, and some that will have trouble showing that they can get to a near commodity or commodity price point. And the question is just, is there going to be capital to support those initiatives and businesses long term? The good news is there's a lot of other people other than VCs investing in those businesses. So I hope that they still find their capital and money to keep going. But that's another discussion topic on how do we keep the train rolling now that we got it started.
So do you think this cellular protein or the synthetic protein, not the plant protein that Impossible sells, do you think that can scale?
I think in certain ways, absolutely. And I think in certain ways, we still have yet to prove it. And so if you look at let's start the fundamentals, which is we're going to run into a protein crisis in the world. There's more people being born. We'll have 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. And the current way we get our protein, right, through animal-based products only scales so far. And there's no right now any way to exponentially scale that. So that's why plant-based protein became a thing, right? Because they can fill a good amount of that gap because we've already got soy and wheat protein and now yellow pea and chickpea. And, there's a million different crops that people are trying to pull protein out of. One of our companies in our first portfolio is a company called Plantable Foods. Plantable pulls a protein called rubisco out of a waterborne plant called lebna or duckweed. It's the most sustainable protein on the planet because it exists in every plant. It's very easy to grow these plants. They double or triple in volume every 2 to 3 days. So you can harvest it and it'll be back almost immediately. It's crazy how fast this plant grows. And it has very high protein per volume content. So you can get a very good protein out of these things if you can rip it out, extract it, clean it, and get it ready for food inclusion so it doesn't have taste, color. So I think we're going to make a ton of innovation on the plant-based side. I don't want to say we're past the plant-based revolution. We're still very much in the plant-based revolution as a protein source. But after that, you have 2 other technologies that come after that. One is what we call synthetic biology, or using yeast and bacteria as factories to make protein. Now, I'll go into a little history about this because this is one that I'm very fascinated with. We've been harnessing yeast and bacteria for thousands of years, right? Beer making. winemaking, bread making, right? All rely on this little creature eating sugar and spitting out something else, CO2, alcohol, whatever it is. Now,
Yeah.
I spent time in the wine industry. So in between tech jobs, I actually went to work for a large winery and restaurant group. I had studied a little bit about wine in college. And so I fell in love with the idea that we have these bacterial and microbial factories that off a very cheap input, sugar, could spit out a ton of different products. And what most people don't realize is there's some very high volume products that exist on the market thanks to synthetic biology, namely insulin is created using synthetic biology these days. And rennet, the additive that turns milk into cheese, is also made using synthetic biology or yeast and bacteria to turn one substance into another. And what we've learned over the last several years is we can train or program these yeast and bacteria to become factories for a lot of different things. Again, I'll give an example from our portfolio. I invested very early on in a company called Geltor. Geltor has trained yeast and bacteria to eat industrial glucose and spit out collagen or gelatin. So we don't have to rely on animals as a primary source for gelatin or collagen. They go one step farther, which is we want to make something akin to human collagen. And this is essential for the cosmetics industry, right? Like you're putting skin cream or creams on your hands or face, right? Right now you're putting mostly animal collagen, right? Fish or some other pig collagen on your hands and face. Wouldn't it be better just to put human skin cells on top of human skin cells to help them regenerate? And so what they realized was, well, we can synthetically create human collagen by using yeast and bacteria. I'm just putting the program in these yeast hosts and they'll eat sugar and spit out human collagen. So Geltor has now been very successful. They're in a number of different kind of cosmetics products and they're scaling into the food industry. So I believe synthetic biology has a long way to go on protein production as it relates to food. And we're starting to see that really starting to take hold right now. Now, there's a longer term technology called cell culturing. Cell culturing is different from synthetic biology in that you're trying to promulgate a certain type of cell or have it delineate a certain type of cell by feeding it some growth media and kind of stimulating it and keeping it active. What most people are trying to make is meat, right? And so we want to make steak in a bioreactor in a fermenter. We want to make chicken, we want to make fish, whatever. So you have to start with a starting material, which is usually some kind of stem cell or some biopsy from a cow that has cells that are alive. And you want to keep those cells alive long enough that they promulgate and create more of them, whether it be muscle or fat or other things. Now, the problem is this is a technology that is still yet to prove to work at scale, meaning we can't make enough meat right now to show that it actually works. There's a number of challenges to getting there, from what do you feed those cells and how do you continuously feed them, to keeping them alive and stabilizing them, to ultimately getting them to adhere to each other and create these structures that will be meat-like to us, which involves multiple different technologies, not just the cells promulgating, but other things called scaffolding on which cells adhere to create texture and consistency, through to the cleanliness of the process to feed someone this. And so all of these steps and things are being figured out right now by a lot of very smart companies with a lot of money right now. But no one yet has a product on market where people can sit down and regularly, on a daily basis, eat cultured meat. We believe that that's coming. Now, the question in my mind being a VC is when, right? Because VCs take $1 and need to return $10, right? Based on a certain time period. And so most VC funds, as you know, are 10-year vintages, maybe 12, 13, if they have some time to extend. There's not a lot of evergreen funds out there. There's more coming today, but we have to return money to our LPs within a 10-year time horizon, on average, right? Ideally. The reality is we don't know when this is going to crack and break some of these barriers from both a scientific and a production perspective. We don't know if it's going to be economically feasible at scale. There's a lot of reports out there, some that say yes, some that say no. So you can read a bunch of different reports and get a complete different picture on whether this is feasible or not. And then there's the unknown of the consumer demand. So some reports will say, 2/3 of people will want to eat it. Some will say 1/3 or less. We don't know until people are faced with the choice, right, at the end of the day, and faced with a choice at a certain price point. So there's a lot of unknowns in the culture meat space. I, for one, hope it succeeds and hope it becomes a very big business. But I already see the markings of synthetic biology and using yeast and bacteria to make protein as a very clear thing that we have prior art and can scale. And we're going to also look at how we place bets on the future, in things like cell culturing, so that it potentially can be a replacement long term if it breaks these barriers.
Yeah. So, when it comes to consumer behavior, right? So, what nascent consumer behavior today in food do you think will become mainstream in like maybe 5, 10 years?
That's a great question. Pulling out the crystal ball and trying to make some bets here. I mean, that's our job. But if I had that crystal ball, I would be betting on sporting events rather than in venture. But yeah, I mean, the easiest one to start off with is I think people are starting to get the realization that food is health. Food is medicine, right? I eat certain things, I don't feel very good. I eat other things, I feel great, right? And so we're starting to dial in what works in our individual bodies. And because we're all individual creatures, there is no way of saying Brian is just like Rahul and should eat exactly the same thing. No, it's not the case. You may be a runner and an athlete, and I may be a couch potato, right? And that means that our nutritional needs are completely different just from that one variable, right? And so I think personalized nutrition as a consumer behavior, personalizing what they eat based on their need, their health goal. If you want to lose weight, if you want to reverse diabetes, all of these things are capable depending on diet, exercise, and other things, but diet being one of the major factors that can help influence how you live a healthy and happy life. One of my LPs recently asked me, they're like, do you want people to live longer? And I go, well, I would like their quality of life to be as long as possible through their lifespan. If we can increase lifespan, that's great. But I want, my grandmother and my mother and, other people's mothers and grandmothers and fathers and grandfathers, I want them to live into their 80s and 90s with all their mental faculties, be an active lifestyle. And we know that health has a big relationship to a lot of different diseases within the body. We're just starting to unlock the gut-brain connection, right? What we feed ourselves and how our mental state can improve based on what we eat. Imagine if we can reverse Alzheimer's, right? Because of our diet, that would be an amazing thing. And so I think that's one consumer behavior is people are recognizing that food brings a health benefit, and we should be paying more attention to that. To that extent, the US government has even said we need to spend time and energy. They've actually created a coalition called FNHIC, Food and Nutrition Health Investors Consortium, that's been supported by the US government to get started so that we're bringing more money into this kind of food is health and food is medicine kind of focus. That's one big consumer behavior. Second consumer behavior, I think, is people are starting to integrate more plant-based foods into their diet. I'm not one of the people that think that everybody's going to go vegan tomorrow, but I do think that eating plants on a more regular basis is healthier both for you and the planet, and lessening your meat consumption is just good overall for a number of different reasons. And so we want to see more plant-based products have the qualities that people appreciate, not just nutrition, but also have the functional and taste and quality characteristics that they need. And nowhere is that more evident than in, I would say, the alternative dairy space. So I see alternative dairy continuing to rise and being not just a alternative, and actually that's almost denigrating its position right now in the market. It should be on par, if not better than its, traditional counterpart. And if you know what's going on in the coffee world, so I use coffee as kind of the benchmark of where alternative dairy is going to go. A friend of mine who runs a very, very large chain of cafes said, 1/3 of all people are walking in asking for alternative dairy. He's like, it's not far off that it's 1 and 2, right? And we're starting to see the initial shifts of some companies deciding that oat or almond milk will become its standard milk versus traditional dairy. I think Blue Bottle, if I remember, made that decision recently that they're going to make their primary milk oat or almond milk. I think it's oat milk. And they're going to make traditional dairy its alternative, right? You have to ask for it. And so I think the consumer behavior around alternative dairy is leading to a very massive shift in our eating and drinking behaviors, which I think long-term are going to be good for society, good for the environment, and ultimately have to be good for health. Those are two big kind of things we see happening. Yeah. I see there's a lot of other things underneath the surface beyond the consumer behaviors that we care about on the food and ag tech side that just have to happen for sustainability and profitability, in the space. But yeah, those are two of my big things. Alternative dairy will continue to grow, and there'll be a demand for it that possibly will outstrip traditional dairy. And personalized nutrition and health will become more of a factor in how people eat going forward.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I really believe that food is health. So then I've been like looking at continuous glucose monitoring, trying to do the gut bacteria check and things like that. So yeah, I can see that
Full
accelerating for
disclosure,
sure.
I'm a personal investor in Levels, the company that sends you a continuous glucose monitor and you can track what you eat. I found that white rice, my body reacts very poorly to white rice, and I live in an Asian household, and so we eat a lot of white rice, and that was very disastrous for me. But now that I've kind of cut a lot of white rice out, I feel a lot better. So you're going to learn so much through these new technologies. And to be honest with you, I can't wait until we have a non-contact glucometer, blood glucose measurement, and we're on the cusp. We know Apple is working on one. Like there's multiple reports that Apple's going to come out with one at some point. And then there's a couple other companies that are working on non-contact. That'll just expand the access to these things. We call it healthcare with a little h versus healthcare with a big H, right? You have to be prescribed a continuous glucose monitor. But when we can all get it in an Apple Watch or in some wearable device, it'll just take off. And so I agree with you. There's so much opportunity now in that sector.
Yeah. Yeah, personally, also the thing with me is that I grew up being an Asian, being an Indian, grew up eating white rice. So it's hard for me to give up. But then I've tested eating white rice. It really is not good for me.
Yes. And then you need to find the rice alternatives, right? And so there's so many now on the market, that are coming to market. And so there's a great example, right? For an Asian or Indian household, what are all our alternatives? That creates a huge market opportunity, right? That someone can go execute on right now. So, you're elucidating, we're creating data that will create new challenges for us to overcome. And so there's just an explosion of new opportunities like this that we have to go solve.
Yeah. And, one last question before we end this. What is something that you're spending more time on than usual these days?
Yeah, great question. I would say agricultural technology, we're spending a lot more time on. The plight of the American farmer and the plight of the farmer worldwide is really currently compromised for a number of reasons. Like I said, fertilizer prices have increased over the last year. Access to technologies to rid their farms of pests and weeds, to stimulate their crops for more productivity, all have been very, very big topics. Even just water utilization and management. Water is becoming more scarce in certain regions. And sometimes it's overabundant. Sometimes you have flooding. And so you have to do better water management on a more precise scale. So I would say one of our biggest focuses for this year is going to be precision agriculture. How do you use the right amount of resources at the right time? And how do you manage and meter your resources so you're not overspending, over-fertilizing, over-watering? Because that's all just cost to you at the end of the day. So ag tech is an area that I'm spending a ton of time right on now. And the other area shouldn't be no surprise. I mean, if you talk to any VC in the last 3 months, AI, machine learning. And I'm not one of those guys that fetishizes ChatGPT. I'm just like, yeah, that's a technology. It's cool. It can answer questions. But really, how is it solving problems in the real world? And that's where I get to AI and machine learning for the food and agricultural systems is probably one of the biggest transformative things that we use applied AI. And so we work closely with a bunch of groups. One notably is UC Davis has an AI for food systems lab. And so we work with a number of people in that lab to kind of stay on top of how artificial intelligence is coming into managing and predicting crop yield and what we have to do to solve for crop stresses and problems. We're also looking at AI and ML for protein engineering. Like I said, if we've got this protein gap, how do we take our understanding of the natural world, put it into silicon, because silicon's cheaper to run than biological processes, model it in silicon before we then unleash it on the world in terms of synthetic biology. And we already see Google and other people with DeepMind and AlphaFold going after these type of problems, but they have to be integrated into our production systems. And so we're looking a lot at how, we can gather data about the natural world, right? That's number one, is you need to understand the natural world. Two, you need to figure out how to apply new sciences into the natural world. And so things like CRISPR technology that will allow us to genetically engineer better crops and better tools to solve food related problems. And then ultimately how to model that more in silicon so that we can stave off the time, energy, and cost. Because if you know anything about crop breeding, right, we've been doing crop breeding the same way by crossing two crops that have traits that we value to create a new crop out of that, right? That goes back to the days of Mendel. When we can model that in silicon and do that crossbreeding and planning for thousands, if not millions, if not trillions of variants, right? That becomes so much more efficient than trying to do it by brute force using our biological and chemical means. And so AI and ML applied will have a massive, massive impact on the farming and food production sector. It just has to be understood, and it has to be applied correctly. Like any tool, it could be beneficial or it could be a weapon. And I think what people are very worried about is that biology and AI become a weapon. And we're trying to stay very much on the side of, no, it's going to be applied by the right people under the right conditions with the right safeguards so that we don't end up in the same chemical revolution and toxic environment that we've created for ourselves. So I think we've learned a lot, and I think we'll apply AI in the right ways and synthetic biology to kind of solve some major issues.
Yeah. If you think about it, right before Green Revolution, the situation was just as grim, right? We were not in a position to feed the number of people that we had, but then Green Revolution changed everything. So I think similarly with tech, and given we allocate resources and time, it's gonna be repeated. I believe, like
I would say the other thing is, at least in the US, we have a labor shortage too, right? And so I think there's not enough people to pick and produce the vegetables and the products that we need to produce. And so we need to figure out how to augment humans. We like to call them cobots, which is systems that will help humans do the jobs that they need to do on a day-to-day basis so that humans can do the higher level tasks at the end of the day, right? No college age American wants to go pick lettuces in, the Central Valley of California. That's why we have a huge immigrant labor force that comes in and does that work. Now we need to provide them, a quality of living, a standard of living that is reasonable, and so costs are rising, access to this labor force is getting harder. So we think that there is also an opportunity to kind of fix our labor challenges by applying technology, again, in the right ways and not trying to over mechanize, something that just can't be. Like, we still have to have human hands, looking at and checking and making sure things are working properly. We still have people that own farms, and they're going to have to figure out how to use these resources, right, to better fit their needs. And so that's another area where we see there's a unique opportunity to go to. But to your point, it's a massive industry, right? We have no shortage of problems. The question is, do we have the technologies and technologists coming to help solve them? And I think if I'm to leave you on kind of one very uplifting note is we're starting to see the likes of Google engineers, Facebook engineers, Microsoft engineers, right, go, my family did something in the food and agricultural sector for hundreds of years. I went off and I, got my degree in artificial intelligence, or I got my degree in computer vision, or I got my degree in, kind of synthetic biology, for drug development, whatever it is. They're all now turning and looking at the food system going like, it's our next revolution. If we could fix this, I not only fix a big market opportunity, I solve something that I'm passionate about and actually changes the world. And so I see a lot more technologists and scientists rushing in going, if we were to do one thing, again, I don't want to ever promote we do only one thing, but if we did something that was impactful, fixing the food and agricultural system is both going to generate a lot more profit in the future just because of population growth and demand, but it's also going to create an environment and human condition that we all will appreciate. And so I'm very, very hopeful that, through this podcast and through talking to a lot of people like yourself, we can reach more people to get into this industry, spend time and energy on solving some of the biggest world problems out there. And that will make money. And then you'll see VCs like me, coming to the table more and more these days. And so I'm hopeful, for the future, given where we're at today and the growth I see in this opportunity.
Yeah, this is great, Brian. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Rahul. Great questions, and really excited to see this podcast get out to the people that need it, whether they be corporates, investors, or startup founders, and helping them kind of chart a path that will help everybody on the planet. So thank you for doing this.